This is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and this is the S25 Ultra. Both are flagship phones, both released this year, but one is not like the other. I want to help you decide whether either of these phones are a good fit and which one might be worth it depending on who you are and what you're looking for. Because this year, a lot has changed, and even though the Fold is the more premium, expensive option out of the two, there's actually things that it can't do that the Ultra can. Before we get into it though, I just want to say thank you for the support on the channel. We are almost at 70,000 subscribers, which is, I feel like every time I say this, I say I can't believe that, but seriously, like I never thought the channel would get to this point. If you're watching and you enjoy it, showing that support goes a really long way, so thank you so much. Anyways, I want to start off with the price just so you know upfront how much these things cost. The S25 Ultra released in February of this year for $1,300 US. Now, it's been a few months and it's been on some ridiculous discounts. Usually you can get a few $100 off, a watch, or even some buds thrown in, so it's worth keeping an eye out for those deals when they do happen. However, the Fold is a little bit different. This phone only just came out, it's on pre-order, and it costs about $2,000 US. This is not including any trade-in promos or deals you'd get right now for pre-ordering, but if we look at the MSRP, the Fold costs $700 more than the S25 Ultra. Now, is that 50% price increase giving you 50% more? Well, to be honest, that's a lot more tricky to answer, and that's why I wanted to make this video. Starting with the build quality, there's the Galaxy Z Fold 7, which uses aluminum for the frame, and it feels really nice in the hand this year, being Samsung's thinnest foldable at only 8.9 millimeters when closed, and only 4.2 millimeters when open. But most importantly, for a foldable, it's actually really light at only 215 grams. The S25 Ultra, on the other hand, is actually heavier at 218 grams. But what's worth considering is that the S25 Ultra is using titanium for the frame, which does weigh more than aluminum, and it's also much stronger. And although the Fold 7 can at times look thinner when closed than the Ultra actually is thinner at 8.2 millimeters. That being said, in the hand, when the Fold is shut, I actually prefer how it feels over the S25 Ultra. It's a little shorter and not as wide, which makes it much easier to one hand, and although the cover display on the Folds have always been quite narrow, Samsung's improved this a lot with the Fold 7, now giving you a 6.5-inch cover display. The S25 Ultra's front screen and only screen is much bigger at 6.9 inches, though it's also using their anti-reflective glass, which makes a massive difference for outside visibility. The Ultra's is also a higher resolution at 1440p versus the 1080p panel on the Fold 7, but unless you actually enable the 1440p mode on the S25 Ultra, you won't see a difference, and even then, given the size of these panels, both are incredibly sharp and both look very good. In terms of comfort, I actually do prefer the Fold. I do have smaller hands, but I do like that the S25 Ultra's corners are a lot more rounded, which makes it less fatiguing over time since it doesn't pinch into my palm. However, the big leg up with the Fold is the inner display. You now get an 8-inch panel, which has the exact same 2600 nit peak brightness as the Ultra, and it's insane for when it comes to multitasking. You can multitask on the S25 Ultra, but because of the aspect ratio, it's never actually been ideal. On the Fold though, having basically two full-size native applications is actually something that is usable. Plus, the phone can act like a mini stand if you wanted to prop it up for videos, which I think is really cool. I think the Fold only really makes sense if you are actually going to utilize that inner display for multitasking. If you do something like sign a lot of PDFs or work with a lot of documents and spreadsheets, I think that's where the Fold does take the cake over the Ultra for its screen real estate. While we're on that topic though, one leg up that the Fold had that they've now removed in the Fold 7 is something that sits perfectly fine on the S25 Ultra, and that's the S Pen. The thing is that the Ultra used to be like the perfect canvas for digital artists and for note-taking, and now with the removal of the S Pen, this display is actually missing a really big feature, which I think is quite silly. Samsung actually removed the digitizer for the S Pen in an effort to make this phone thinner, which means that not only can you not buy an S Pen for the Fold 7, but even if you had one from a previous generation, it just straight up isn't gonna work. In fact, the S25 Ultra is the only current Samsung phone that they still make that has an S Pen, so I don't know. is this something that you care a lot about? It is something that is nice to have. I've never went out of my way to purchase one for the Fold because it was always an optional accessory, but not having it and not giving people the choice is a little silly. I guess while we're on this though, some other pros and cons that are definitely worth considering with these devices is that the S25 Ultra charges faster than the Fold 7 at 45 watts versus 25 watts. And despite the Fold 7 being larger, because of how it's built, it has a smaller battery at 4,400 milliamp hours versus 5,000. Now that's definitely something that's not only going to have an impact on the battery life with the battery size, but if you're like me, I only charge my phone in the car. I can get a full day of charge out of my first morning, grabbing coffee and running a couple errands with the S25 Ultra, and I can barely get a decent charge out of the Fold 7, which means I've had to start charging this at nighttime, which is just not in my normal routine at all. So yeah, not only is the battery smaller on the Fold 7 and it charges slower, but you actually get less out of your charge. And I think that's something that, besides everything else like the S Pen and whatnot, this is one of the biggest gripes that I have with this phone. Though some things that I do like about the Fold 7 is that the fingerprint reader is actually inside of the power button versus being an under display sensor. For me, it's been faster and it's also more reliable because I don't have to think about where I'm placing my finger. But this does mean that unlocking your phone when it's on a table is a lot more challenging because you have to get your finger in there. You can't just tap on the screen, which is something that is nice to have with the Ultra. But thankfully, both do have face unlock, both work incredibly well, and it's something that I do use as well as the fingerprint reader, which just makes my life a little easier on both of them. Now, I won't dive into software too much because this will change in the next coming months, but the Fold 7 is shipping with Android 16 with One UI 8, whereas the Ultra is still on Android 15 with One UI 7. To be honest, it's not a massive change. I don't see any, major difference that's worth mentioning at all in this video, but like I said, that update will be rolling out to the Ultra, so I thought I'd just briefly mention that quickly if you're buying one of these phones today. Now, both of these phones are using the Snapdragon 8 Elite. They also have the same storage configuration and RAM configuration, with the 1TB model giving you 16 gigs of RAM versus the 12 gigs of RAM on the 256 gig and 512 gig models. Though because the S25 Ultra has more internal space, it leaves room for a bigger vapor chamber. So if you're someone that does like to play a lot of games, maybe even edit some videos or photos, the Ultra will handle it better and it won't get as warm in the hand. This is a very powerful chip, which is a blessing and a curse because this means that over time it can throttle when playing demanding titles, and with something like the Fold, because it's thinner, it will throttle faster. However, when it comes to the experience, I'm not someone that's playing like competitive or demanding games on my phone, so if I was to play a game on these devices, I actually do prefer playing it on the Fold just because that display is a lot more enjoyable. It just feels so much more immersive, and I won't show it in this video for legal reasons, but if you're someone that likes to do emulation, GameCube emulation on the Fold is insane because of the aspect ratio, and it performs incredibly with those titles. Now, I do want to talk about those cameras very quickly, so just bear with me. I'm not going to go ahead and say there's one clear winner here. The thing is, the Fold 7's done away with the under display camera on the inside, so for its selfie camera, it's using the same 10 megapixel sensor both on the inner and cover display, and it does look good. The Ultra is using a 12 megapixel selfie camera, which is sharper, but it does have phase detect autofocus, which makes it better for video if you vlog with your phone, for example. But across the Fold and the Ultra, both can shoot at 4K 60 on these selfie cameras. However, the Z Fold 7 is the only one that can shoot log video using both the cover and inner display. On the Ultra, you can't shoot log on that selfie camera at all. So if you want to get the most detail, the best quality that you can out of these sensors, you have to use the rear facing cameras, which can be a little annoying if you are just trying to film yourself. So if this is something that you care about, the Fold is a great choice for filming yourself and shooting in log. If you don't even know what log is, it's not something that you're going to utilize at all. The Ultra selfie camera is undeniably better. Though I will say something about the Fold that has an edge for me is the fact that I can actually use this thing as like a little mini tripod, which does make those segments where I just need a quick shot of myself or I need to talk to the camera for a quick second a lot easier to film, and I don't have to try to prop this thing up awkwardly. But when it comes to the main cameras, it's a bit of a different story. The Fold has three primary shooters: a 200 megapixel main lens, a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. Whereas the S25 Ultra has the same 200 megapixel lens, the same 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, but it has a 50 megapixel ultra wide and a 50 megapixel 5x times telephoto. The main camera on both is fantastic. The 200 megapixel lens looks genuinely very good, and you're going to get similar results at 3x with the telephoto on the Ultra and the Fold. However, the 50 megapixel ultra wide versus the Fold's 12 megapixel is night and day when it comes to zooming in. You get a lot more detail, and at the end of the day, if you decided to print any of these images, the higher resolution sensor from the Ultra will always look better. Though the thing is, the addition of the 50 megapixel 5x telephoto on the Ultra is probably going to be enough to sell this phone over the Fold for a lot of people. Having a native zoom lens with a high resolution sensor on a phone is truly something that I find hard to live without these days, especially because I've been traveling a lot lately. And the Ultra just really doesn't disappoint at all. I don't feel as limited as I do when I'm using the Fold, which is nice. And one quick note, the Fold 7 cannot do 4K 120 frames per second like the Ultra, but both can shoot video at 8K 30 frames per second. Now, a couple of quick things that I forgot to mention. The Fold only has an IP rating of IP48 versus IP68 on the S25 Ultra. So they should hold up similarly when it comes to water resistance, but if you take your Fold to the beach, something like a simple grain of sand could get in there and actually really hurt the hinge. Personally though, I actually think the whole durability issue on the Fold is something that is completely overblown. I've had pretty much every generation of these phones since the Fold 3, and even in the early days, I haven't had an issue when it comes to the actual build of these devices. I've never had a screen problem, I've never had a hinge issue, and even though this phone is aluminum, I've beat the absolute living crap out of the Fold 5. I've took chunks off of the frame, and the phone still held up and worked really well. Now, take that as you will. I don't use these phones for like 2-3 years, so I don't have like that long-term experience with them. As long as you're not doing like a construction job or something that you're gonna basically, destroy this phone on a daily basis, I really don't think you're gonna have a problem using this thing day to day. And when it comes to the speakers, the S25 Ultra does sound better. It's louder, it gets deeper, and it sounds less distorted at those higher volumes. Though the Fold doesn't sound bad, it still sounds really good considering how thin it is, but I thought it was just worth mentioning that. And when it comes to like the cellular reception and all that hoopla with like Wi-Fi and 5G, both of these are exactly the same. I've not had any issue with either of these devices, so that is good. So yeah, I mean, this video could just go on and on. I wanted to more so just highlight some of the major differences that you'd notice out of the gate with either of these devices, all without kind of getting like super nitty gritty and into every single detail, because I want this video to at least help and appeal to as many of you as it possibly can. As for what I personally prefer, I think the charging speed, the battery life, and the cameras on the Ultra do win me over. However, I use my phone a disgusting amount, and I've always been a sucker for foldables, and I like that I could just do more on the Fold when I need to, but also have it be a more compact, comfortable slab phone when I'm out and about. So if price wasn't a factor at all for me, I would personally pick the Fold. If you're a power user or a creative who values the screen space and multitasking, the Fold 7 is unbeatable, at least here in North America, but for most people, the Ultra gives you more value per dollar. Anyways, let me know in the comments down below what you actually think of these devices, which one you'd personally pick up over the other, and yeah, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, especially how you guys think about the new Fold 7. Anyways, that's been it. Thank you so much for watching this one. A like and a sub to the channel goes a really long way. If you've watched all the way through, consider dropping a turtle emoji down in the comments down below. And yeah, I'll see you all on the next one. Peace out.